Part 1. The old Greendale Forest was a place of mystery and fear, known for stories that kept even the bravest locals away. People claimed that shadows lurked in its depths, whispering voices carried through the trees, and strange flashes of light appeared at night. But the most chilling story was of the wandering clown, a strange figure in tattered, mismatched clothes, with laughter that echoed through the trees. No one knew where the clown had come from, but everyone in town knew one thing: never go into Greendale after dark. For Max, Jason, Lily, and Sam, the forest was an irresistible thrill. They'd grown up hearing the tales of the clown, and after years of wondering, they were ready to prove that the stories were just exaggerated legends. So, on a cool October night, the four friends packed flashlights, snacks, and a single phone for emergencies, determined to discover the truth about Greendale Forest. The trees towered above them, casting long, dark shadows. A mist clung to the ground, swirling around their ankles, making each step feel heavier. Max, always the boldest of the group, led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Jason, close behind, tried to keep the mood light by cracking jokes, though his nervous laughter gave him away. Lily clung to Sam's arm, her face tense, though she tried to smile and pretend it was just another adventure. "If that clown shows up, I'm out of here," Jason muttered, glancing around at every rustling leaf. Sam chuckled, though he sounded as uneasy as the rest. "It's probably just an old legend. We'll find a broken down tent or maybe some footprints, and then we'll head back and laugh about this over pizza." As they walked, the forest grew eerily quiet. The further they ventured, the fewer sounds there were, until all they could hear was the crunch of leaves underfoot. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the mist thickened, casting strange shadows that seemed to shift and twist at the edge of their vision. Max stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "Did you guys hear that?" They all paused, listening intently. At first, there was only silence, but then a faint laugh drifted through the trees, echoing softly. It was high-pitched, almost like a child's giggle, but there was something unsettling about it. Jason forced a laugh. "Good one, Max. Did you bring a speaker to play creepy sounds?" Max shook his head, his expression serious. "That wasn't me, man." The laughter echoed again, closer this time, and they all turned, shining their flashlights into the trees. Darkness stared back, and the mist seemed to thicken, creeping higher, wrapping around them. Sam tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's an owl." "Owls laugh, right?" Lily rolled her eyes. "Sam, owls don't laugh." That was definitely not a hoot. As if to prove her point, the laugh sounded again, this time from right behind them. They spun around, flashlights darting across the trees, but there was nothing there. Only shadows and the ever-thickening mist. Max took a deep breath, his voice steady. "All right, it's probably someone messing with us. Let's stick together and keep going." They walked on, slower this time, their eyes scanning the shadows, every step accompanied by a growing sense of dread. Jason held his flashlight tightly, muttering under his breath about how they were all going to regret this. Then Sam stopped, eyes wide. Out of the corner of his eye, he'd seen a flash of color in the mist. He turned, shining his flashlight, but the shape was gone, swallowed by the trees. His voice was barely a whisper. "Did anyone else see that?" They all froze, staring into the darkness. Slowly, a figure began to take shape, a tall, thin shape, dressed in a faded clown suit, with wild hair sticking out in all directions. Its face was hidden in shadow, but they could see a wide, painted grin stretched across its face. The clown stood perfectly still, watching them with an eerie, unblinking gaze. Then, without a sound, it raised one hand and waved. Lily let out a small scream, clutching Sam's arm as they took a step back, flashlights trembling in their hands. No one moved, and the clown remained still, its hand frozen in mid-wave. Jason's voice was barely audible. "This isn't funny. Let's go." They turned, walking back the way they had come, flashlights focused on the clown. But as they moved, it took a step forward, matching their pace. It moved silently, its shoes sinking into the damp leaves without a sound, its grin seeming to grow wider. Max tried to keep his voice steady. Just stay calm. If we don't panic, we'll get out of here." But the clown took another step, then another, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring their fear. The mist thickened around them, making it harder to see, and they began to pick up the pace, walking faster, glancing back every few seconds. Then the laughter started again, louder this time, echoing through the trees from every direction. It sounded like multiple voices, all blending together, creating a haunting, disturbing chorus that filled the forest. They broke into a run, their footsteps pounding on the forest floor. But no matter how fast they went, the laughter stayed with them, growing louder, closer. Shadows flickered in the mist, strange shapes moving just beyond their sight, and every now and then they catch a glimpse of the clown's painted face, grinning at them from the darkness. Jason stumbled, nearly tripping over a root, and Max grabbed his arm, pulling him up. "Keep moving. We're almost there." But just as they thought they had escaped, they reached a clearing. The trees opened up around them, revealing an old, broken-down tent in the center, its fabric torn and covered in moss. The laughter stopped, and silence settled over them, heavy and oppressive. They slowed, catching their breath, glancing around. The mist swirled around them, casting strange shadows, and the forest felt close, as if it were pressing on them. Sam took a step forward, his flashlight illuminating the tent. "Guys, I think we found where the clown lives." Lily shivered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Great. Just what we needed." Max approached the tent, curiosity fighting his fear. He lifted the edge of the fabric, peering inside, but found nothing, just an old sleeping bag and some crumpled cans, as if someone had camped there long ago. Jason frowned, looking around. "So, where did the clown go?" They exchanged uneasy glances, each of them feeling the weight of the silence. It was as if the forest were holding its breath, waiting for something. Then, from the trees behind them, the laughter began again, louder than ever, echoing through the clearing. They turned, flashlights darting across the shadows, but saw nothing. Then the clown stepped out from behind a tree, its smile wider, its eyes glinting with malice. It raised one hand, pointing directly at them, and began moving forward, faster now, its footsteps loud and heavy. "Run!" Max shouted, and they took off, feet pounding the ground as they raced through the clearing. The clown's laughter followed, louder with each step, until it felt like it was right behind them. Just as they thought they couldn't run any farther, the trees opened up, revealing the edge of the forest and the lights of their town in the distance. They stumbled out, gasping, their faces pale with terror. When they looked back, there was nothing. The forest was silent, the mist thinning in the morning light, and the clown was nowhere to be seen. Max finally broke the silence. "Next time, we're listening to the warnings." Part 2. As Hannah's fingers hovered over the surface of Blackwood Lake, a sudden, intense chill filled the air. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them in a haunting melody. The dark water seemed alive, as though something deep below was stirring, waiting for them. Leah tugged at Hannah's sleeve, her voice urgent. "We shouldn't be here. It feels like the lake is watching us." But Hannah, transfixed, nodded absently, her curiosity overriding her fear. James tried to pull back, but he too was caught by the whispers, each one pulling him in, promising secrets from the depths. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the whispers stopped. The silence was overwhelming, pressing down with an intensity that made their ears ring. They exchanged a confused look, feeling the weight of something unfinished, something waiting. Hannah finally pulled herself away from the lake's edge. "Let's go back to camp," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Maybe we can understand this, but we need some distance." Relieved, Leah led them back to their small campsite. They sat around the lantern's warm light, their minds racing with the strange encounter. James broke the silence. "Did anyone else feel like it was calling to us?" he asked. "Like it wanted us closer?" Hannah nodded, her face serious. "There's something about this lake, something ancient. The markings we found, the voices, it feels like we're part of a ritual we don't understand." Leah shuddered, drawing her knees to her chest. "I just want to go home," she murmured. "Whatever is in that lake, it's dangerous." But Hannah was resolute. "No, Leah. We came here for answers. The lake is calling us, and if we leave now, we'll never understand why." Before Leah could argue, a sound echoed from the lake, a deep splash. They turned, flashlights at the ready, but the water was still and dark, concealing whatever had made the noise. Hannah stood, her determination growing. "Let's take a closer look. If something's out there, I want to see it." As they approached the lake, a fog rose from the surface, curling around them and creating an eerie atmosphere. James threw a rock into the lake, breaking the silence with a sharp splash. As the ripples faded, the whispers returned, louder, echoing in a ghostly chorus. One voice grew stronger, rising above the others with a single, chilling word, "Stay." The sound was so clear that it felt like someone was right behind them. Leah shone her flashlight into the darkness, but there was no one there. Then, as if answering her light, a figure began to emerge from the lake, a tall, dark shape with empty eyes, watching them from just beneath the surface. It moved slowly, its presence filling them with horror, yet they couldn't look away. Leah's voice trembled as she clung to James. "We need to leave. Now." But Hannah was transfixed. She stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. "It's trying to tell us something. We're so close to understanding." James pulled her back, desperation filling his voice. "I don't care. We're leaving, now." They dragged Hannah away, the whispers fading as the figure watched them disappear into the mist. Back at camp, shaken and silent, they tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. The memory of the lake's dark shape haunted them, its empty eyes fixed on their minds. At dawn, they decided to leave. Whatever they had hoped to find, it was too dangerous to pursue. But as they reached the path back to the forest, Hannah stopped, looking back at the lake, her face pale, her eyes distant, as if in a trance. "Hannah, what's wrong?" Leah asked, her voice trembling. Hannah didn't respond. She turned and began walking toward the water, each step slow and deliberate. James and Leah called out, trying to hold her back, but she moved with unnatural strength, shrugging off their hands as she waded into the lake. They screamed, reaching for her, but she moved deeper, disappearing into the mist and the whispers. The lake's silence swallowed her, leaving only ripples on the dark surface. James and Leah stood frozen, horror and disbelief filling their minds. They called her name, but there was no response. Blackwood Lake had claimed her, leaving nothing but the dark, quiet water as evidence of her fate. They stumbled back, dazed and terrified, knowing they would carry this memory alone. Hannah was gone, lost to the lake's whispers, and they knew no one would ever believe the nightmare they had witnessed. The truth of Blackwood Lake would remain hidden, waiting for its next visitor. Here's an additional 1,000 characters added to Part 2. As the morning sun filtered weakly through the dense forest, James and Leah remained on the shore, unable to accept what had happened. Hannah was gone, vanished without a trace, and the lake had returned to its dark, silent state as if it had never stirred. The mist rose around them, thickening as if trying to swallow the shoreline, to erase any trace of their friend's presence. It felt almost as if the lake itself was mocking them, daring them to follow her into the depths. Leah broke the silence, her voice trembling. "We can't just leave her here. There has to be a way to bring her back. She wouldn't just disappear." James shook his head, his face pale with shock and sorrow. "The lake took her. I don't know what we can do against something like that. It's like this place is alive, feeding on anyone who gets too close." But Leah refused to give up. Her mind raced as she tried to think of anything, any way they could reach Hannah. What if she's still out there, somewhere? What if she's trapped, needing us to help her? James hesitated, glancing back at the lake. A part of him wanted to believe Leah's hope, but the fear in his gut was stronger, a primal instinct urging him to stay away, to avoid looking too deeply into Blackwood Lake's mysteries. He could feel the invisible pull of the lake even now, tempting him to return, to seek out answers in its depths. It was as if it knew they were considering coming back. But the thought of leaving without Hannah gnawed at him. His friend, his curiosity, his logic, they all warred with each other, each pulling him in a different direction. And as he stood there, he began to hear it, a faint whisper, calling his name from somewhere beyond the mist, beyond the surface of the lake.
This is the tale of a person who ventured into the abandoned Greendale forest, a place infamous for eerie legends and the ghostly figure of a wandering clown. In search of a thrill, they soon found themselves lost in a maze of mist, shadows, and haunting laughter. Part 3. As night fell, Max, Jason, and Lily stood at the edge of Greendale Forest, staring into the dark abyss of trees. They had spent the day gathering supplies, but nothing felt like enough. Each of them held onto a flashlight, their only barrier against the darkness, along with a mixture of old relics they hoped might somehow protect them from the clown. Lily took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Okay, let's just remember, stick together, no matter what. We get Sam and get out. Jason nodded, his jaw clenched. No more running. If that clown tries anything, we stand our ground. They entered the forest, flashlights piercing through the darkness. The familiar mist clung to their ankles as they moved, winding deeper into the woods. Silence enveloped them, thicker than before, with only the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. The air was cold, each breath visible in the pale beams of light. As they moved, the oppressive silence grew heavier, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for them to make a mistake. They reached the clearing where the tent had been the night before, but it was still empty, no torn fabric, no cans, no sign of anyone. Only the soft, misty darkness stretched before them. Max paused, shining his flashlight around. Sam. He called out, his voice echoing into the trees. If you can hear us, yell. They waited, the silence pressing down on them, but there was no answer. Just the faint rustling of leaves and the heavy quiet of the forest. Then, as if on cue, the laughter began again, soft at first, like a whisper on the wind, but gradually growing louder, more distinct. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding them, filling the air with its haunting echo. Lily gripped her flashlight tightly, her face pale. All right, this time, if we see it, we don't panic. Jason nodded, though his hand trembled. Yeah, no panic. Just stand our ground. The laughter grew louder, and the mist seemed to thicken, swirling around them like a living thing. They moved slowly, flashlights trained on the trees, scanning every shadow for any sign of movement. Then, in the distance, they saw it, a figure standing between the trees, half hidden in the mist. It was the clown. The clown's wild hair and tattered clothes were barely visible through the fog, but its painted face grinned out at them, eyes wide with that strange, unsettling intensity. It lifted one hand, pointing directly at them, and began to move forward, its steps slow and deliberate. They stood their ground, flashlights aimed at the figure, trying to suppress the instinct to run. But as the clown drew closer, they could feel the air growing colder, the laughter echoing louder in their ears. It was as if the forest itself were amplifying the sound, each tree carrying the sinister giggles straight to them. Max swallowed hard, calling out into the darkness. We're here for Sam. Let him go. The clown stopped, tilting its head as though considering his words. Then, slowly, it raised both hands, clapping them together in a slow, mocking applause. The sound echoed through the forest, each clap feeling like a countdown, a signal that something terrible was about to happen. Jason took a step forward, his voice trembling with anger and fear. We're not afraid of you. Let Sam go, and we'll leave you alone. The clown's grin widened, impossibly large, and it took another step forward. Then, without warning, it lunged toward them, moving faster than they could have anticipated. The mist surged around it, obscuring their view, and for a terrifying moment, they lost sight of each other in the swirling fog. Lily screamed, reaching out blindly. Jason! Max! Max stumbled, swinging his flashlight wildly, trying to catch a glimpse of his friends. He could hear their voices, faint and distant, but the mist seemed to distort the sound, making it impossible to tell where they were. Then, through the haze, he saw the clown, its face inches from his own. Its painted smile stretched across its face, and its eyes glinted with something dark and malevolent. He felt a cold hand grip his arm, pulling him toward the shadows. Max struggled, kicking out, trying to break free, but the clown's grip was iron, unyielding. Panic surged through him, his mind racing as he fought against the force pulling him deeper into the mist. Suddenly, he heard Jason's voice, closer this time. "Max. Over here." With a final, desperate shove, Max broke free, stumbling back as the clown's grip loosened. He spun around, following Jason's voice, and within moments he found himself back with his friends, their flashlights cutting through the mist. They didn't speak, only shared a look that conveyed the terror they all felt. The clown was somewhere in the fog, watching, waiting, and each of them knew that they couldn't keep running forever. Then, as if to answer their fears, the laughter started again, louder than before, and the mist thickened once more, casting strange, twisting shadows on the ground. But this time, there was something different, a faint voice, barely audible, calling out from somewhere nearby. It was Sam. The sound of their friend's voice filled them with renewed energy, and they moved toward it, pushing through the mist, calling his name. "Sam. Sam, where are you?" The voice grew louder, closer, and within moments they saw him, huddled against a tree, his face pale and frightened. He looked up, relief flooding his face as he saw them. "You came back," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think anyone would come back for me." Lily knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "Of course we came back. We're getting you out of here." But before they could move, the clown reappeared, blocking their path, its face twisted into an expression of rage. It raised one hand, pointing at Sam, its eyes burning with a fury they hadn't seen before. Jason stepped forward, holding up a small mirror they'd taken from Max's garage. "Leave us alone. We're taking Sam, and we're leaving. You don't own us." The clown hesitated, its gaze fixed on the mirror. For a moment, it seemed almost afraid, as though the object in Jason's hand had some power over it. The clown took a step back, and then another, its eyes narrowing with anger as it faded into the mist. They didn't wait to see if it would return. Grabbing Sam's arm, they hurried back through the forest, not stopping until they reached the edge of the trees. Only then did they look back, expecting to see the clown lurking in the shadows. But the forest was empty, silent. The mist had cleared, and the trees stood motionless, as if nothing had happened. Max placed a hand on Sam's shoulder, relief flooding his face. "You're safe now, Sam. We're all safe." They turned and walked back to town, the weight of their fear slowly lifting with each step. As they left Greendale behind, they knew they'd faced something beyond their understanding, something dark and dangerous. But together, they managed to pull their friend from the grip of the forest, and they had no intention of ever returning. And though they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, they knew that, for now, the clown had returned to the shadows, leaving them with a story they would never forget.
Part 4. The morning light had begun to creep over the horizon as the four friends finally stumbled out of the forest and back into the familiar streets of their town. They were exhausted, shaken, and covered in dirt, but alive, and Sam was with them. They didn't speak much as they made their way to Max's house, each of them too drained to process the night's events. But there was a sense of quiet relief, a shared understanding that somehow, against all odds, they had made it out. Once inside Max's garage, they huddled around the small table, sipping water and catching their breath. Sam was visibly shaken, his face pale and his eyes distant as if he were still seeing the forest around him. Jason broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "All right, I think we all agree on one thing, never again. We're done with Greendale, right?" They all nodded, including Sam, who gave a weak, grateful smile. "Thanks for coming back, you guys. I thought I was never getting out of there." Lily reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "We're never leaving anyone behind, Sam. Not ever." Max looked around at his friends, his expression serious. "We need to keep quiet about this. If anyone asks, we tell them we got lost, maybe saw some weird shadows. We're not telling anyone about the clown." Jason frowned, glancing at Max. "You really think we should just forget it? I mean, that thing, it's still out there." Max nodded slowly. But we're not going back, right? As long as we stay away, maybe it'll leave us alone. It's like Greendale belongs to it. A heavy silence fell over them, each of them reliving the terrifying images in their minds, the twisted smile, the cold grip, the mist swirling with every laugh. The night felt like something out of a nightmare, something too surreal to be real. And yet, they all knew what they'd seen was real. They could still feel the weight of it pressing down on them. Days turned into weeks, and as Halloween approached, they found themselves facing endless questions from classmates and neighbors. People asked where they'd been, why they all looked so spooked that night. But they followed Max's advice, brushing it off as a prank gone wrong, a night in the forest that had gotten out of hand. Gradually, the questions faded, and life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could after what they'd experienced. But each of them was left with the knowledge that Greendale Forest held something dark, something they had barely escaped. Sam had begun to sleep better, though he would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares of the clown's painted face. One afternoon, as they gathered at their favorite diner, Jason cleared his throat, glancing around the table. "You know, I've been thinking. We faced that clown, together. Whatever that was, we survived it. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to let fear run my life." Lily nodded, understanding. "Me neither. But that doesn't mean I'm going back there." They all laughed, a sense of relief in their voices. For the first time, the memory didn't feel quite as terrifying. They had faced something terrifying, and they had come out the other side together. Max grinned. "Maybe we'll leave Greendale alone, but who knows, maybe there's another adventure out there somewhere. One that doesn't involve creepy clowns." Sam shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "I'm done with forests. From now on, our adventures happen in broad daylight, preferably with a bunch of people around." They laughed again, and for the first time, the memory of Greendale felt distant, like something they could leave behind. As Halloween night arrived, they found themselves at a local party, surrounded by costumes and laughter. They joined in the fun, each of them feeling the weight of the forest lifting, replaced by the warmth of friendship and the comfort of safety. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to relax, to let go of the memories of Greendale Forest. But as they left the party that night, a strange feeling settled over them, a sense of something watching, waiting. They turned, glancing back toward the distant edge of town where Greendale lay hidden in darkness. The mist had returned, curling around the trees, casting eerie shadows across the ground. Max shivered, though he tried to hide it. "Well, maybe that clown won't be out on Halloween." Jason forced a laugh. "Yeah, besides, we've got enough scary stories for one lifetime, right?" They all nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief as they turned away, walking back to their homes. The shadows of Greendale loomed in the distance, a reminder of what they had faced, of the secret they had shared. But as they walked, the mist stayed behind, clinging to the forest, and a faint, distant laugh echoed through the trees, a laugh that only they could hear, a reminder of the night they had spent in Greendale and the haunting presence they had left behind. They knew they would never forget the forest, and that a part of them would always wonder if the clown was still out there, wandering through the mist, waiting for its next visitors. But for now, they were safe, together, and determined to leave the shadows behind. And as the lights of the town came into view, they knew one thing for sure: they'd faced their fears, found strength in each other, and come back with a bond no forest, no clown, and no legend could break. They say Old Miller's barn is cursed. Abandoned for decades, it's rumored to be haunted by something dark. When four friends venture inside, seeking only a thrill, they discover that some places hide horrors far worse than any ghost story. Part 1. The old house on Thornhill Road had always been a source of fascination in town. Built in the early 1900s, it had once been a grand estate, but years of neglect left it shrouded in mystery and decay. Local kids had dubbed it the Watcher's House, claiming they saw figures in the windows at night, shadows moving behind cracked glass. The legend was simple but eerie: a lonely spirit haunted the house, keeping watch over anyone who dared approach. For Mia, Ben, and Chloe, the Watcher's House was the perfect place to test their courage. They had spent years daring each other to enter, but it wasn't until their senior year that they finally worked up the nerve to go. On a chilly Friday evening, they packed flashlights, snacks, and their phones, planning to spend just a few minutes inside, enough to snap a few photos and satisfy their curiosity. The sun had barely set when they arrived at the house, the sky a dark purple as shadows crept across the yard. The place looked even more intimidating up close, with ivy crawling up the walls and the faint outline of broken window panes glaring down at them. Mia took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "All right, we're doing this. Just a quick look, snap some photos, and we're out." Ben grinned, trying to hide his own nerves. "Yeah, and when people ask if we went in, we'll actually have proof." Chloe stayed silent, eyes fixed on the house. Of the three, she was the most sensitive to anything remotely supernatural, and every creak and shift made her tense up. But she wasn't about to let her friends go in without her. They pushed open the front gate, which groaned in protest, the sound echoing in the empty yard. As they approached the front door, Mia noticed a strange inscription carved into the wood, faded but still legible. "In silence, they see." Then scoffed. Probably just something the last owners thought would be artistic. Mia shrugged, but a chill ran down her spine. Pushing it aside, she turned the doorknob, and the door swung open easily, almost as if it had been waiting for them. The interior was cloaked in darkness, the air thick with dust and a faint, musty odor. They clicked on their flashlights, illuminating the grand entryway, where an old, spiral staircase twisted upward into darkness. The silence was almost oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. Chloe clung to Mia's arm as they stepped further inside, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, and portraits of unsmiling faces stared down at them, their eyes following the group as they moved. "Why do these old houses always have creepy paintings?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe they like the vibe," Ben joked, though his voice trembled. They ventured into the living room, where dust-covered furniture sat frozen in time, as if waiting for someone to return. A grand fireplace took up most of one wall, its mantel cluttered with strange knickknacks, an old pocket watch, a small glass vial, and a faded letter sealed in an ornate envelope. Mia's curiosity got the best of her, and she picked up the letter, carefully breaking the seal. "Should we be opening that?" Chloe asked, eyeing the letter warily. "It's probably just an old receipt or something," Mia replied, though her own hand shook as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant but faded, making it hard to read. She squinted, trying to make out the words, "Asterisk to whoever reads this, know that I remain here, watching over those who wander too close. The silence is my haven, but it is also my curse. Leave while you can, asterisk." Ben chuckled nervously. "That's it? Sounds like someone really got into character." But just as he said this, they heard a faint creak coming from upstairs. They froze, glancing at each other, their flashlights trained on the staircase. Another creak echoed through the house, louder this time, as if someone, or something, was moving above them. Mia took a deep breath, forcing a smile. Probably just the house settling, right? Chloe didn't look convinced, but she nodded, clinging to Mia's arm. "Let's just go up and check it out. Then we can say we went upstairs and get out of here." They climbed the spiral staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. The second floor was even darker, with only faint patches of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. They walked down a narrow hallway, passing rooms with open doors that led into pitch-black spaces. At the end of the hall, a single door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling out from within. Ben motioned to the door, whispering, "Maybe that's where the Watcher hangs out." Mia rolled her eyes, though her heart pounded. "Let's just take a quick look." They pushed the door open, revealing a small bedroom. A chair sat in front of the window, facing the yard, as though someone had been sitting there, keeping watch. On the chair lay an old, moth-eaten coat, with a hat resting on top. Chloe took a step back, a horrified look on her face. This feels wrong." Ben moved closer, shining his flashlight on the chair. "Hey, maybe the place really was haunted. Or someone used to live here and just left everything behind." Just then, a sudden noise came from downstairs, a loud bang, followed by footsteps echoing through the entryway. They all froze, exchanging panicked glances. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer, and they backed away from the door, their hearts racing. Mia whispered, "Okay, maybe we should get out now." They made a run for the stairs, but as they reached the top step, the door to the bedroom slammed shut behind them. Chloe let out a scream, but Mia grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. "Keep going. We're almost out." The footsteps grew louder, almost as if someone was following them down the stairs. They burst into the entryway, and Mia yanked the front door open, practically shoving her friends outside. They ran down the front steps, not stopping until they were a good distance from the house. They turned, gasping for breath, watching the house in eerie silence. From the window on the second floor, they saw it, a shadowy figure standing by the chair, watching them. It raised a hand, as if in farewell, before fading into the darkness. Ben laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair. "Well, we came, we saw, and we survived." Chloe shook her head, still trembling. "Let's never come back here." Mia nodded, her gaze fixed on the empty window. "Agreed." As they walked away, the silence of the house seemed to settle back, as though it had been waiting for them to leave. They could almost feel the eyes on them, watching, but for now, they knew they'd leave the watcher to his silent, eerie vigil. Part 2. The following day, Mia, Ben, and Chloe couldn't stop thinking about the watcher's house. Although they'd agreed to never return, the memory of the shadowy figure in the window, that final wave, kept replaying in their minds. Each of them had felt the eerie sense of being followed home, though none dared speak of it out loud. At school, Ben leaned over to Mia during lunch, whispering, "Are you feeling okay?" Mia glanced up, startled. "You mean other than reliving that creepy night on a loop?" Ben nodded. "I mean, I could barely sleep. Kept thinking I saw shadows moving in my room. It's like the house followed us." Chloe joined them, overhearing. "I felt it too. I even heard footsteps outside my window. It's like we brought something back with us." They shared uneasy looks, the mystery of the house feeling too close to shake. Just then, Mia's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. She frowned, opening it, and felt a chill run down her spine as she read the text. "I'm waiting." She showed it to Ben and Chloe, her voice a whisper. Did one of you send this as a joke?" They both shook their heads, just as disturbed by the message. Ben took a deep breath. "All right, this is getting out of hand. Maybe someone's pranking us, trying to keep the legend alive. Let's meet tonight, just to talk about what's going on." That evening, they gathered in Mia's basement, each of them on edge. The basement was dimly lit, casting shadows that made their faces appear even more tense. Mia's parents were out for the night, so the house was empty, the silence adding to the creeping fear settling over them. Chloe spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we shouldn't have opened that letter. We were warned, right? It said something about staying away, that the watcher was keeping an eye on anyone who came close." Ben crossed his arms, trying to sound confident. "Look, it's probably just an old letter left there to scare us. But I do think there's something more going on. Maybe someone saw us go in and is trying to mess with us." Just as he said this, there was a faint sound, a soft tapping coming from the window. They all turned, their breath catching, but there was nothing there. The room fell into silence again, each of them holding their breath, waiting. Finally, Mia broke the silence. "Look, let's just promise to ignore any weird stuff. Maybe if we stop giving it attention, it'll go away." They agreed, though none of them felt convinced. They each went home that night, determined to put the watcher's house out of their minds. But as Mia lay in bed, the message from earlier replayed in her mind, "I'm waiting." Days passed, and while they tried to avoid the subject, strange things continued to happen. Mia noticed her bedroom light flickering on its own, her window creaking open even when she'd locked it. Ben kept feeling a presence behind him when he walked alone, and Chloe found herself waking up at precisely 3 a.m. each night, an eerie sense of being watched lingering over her. One evening, A week after their visit to the house, Chloe received a new message, this time on her phone. Come back. She stared at the words, a chill running down her spine. She wanted to ignore it, but she felt drawn to the house, as if something there hadn't let go of her. That night, she texted Mia and Ben. *, I got another message. I think we need to go back and see what's going on, *. Ben was reluctant, but the weight of the strange occurrences convinced him. They met at the edge of Thornhill Road, the street lamp above casting a weak, yellow glow. The house loomed in the distance, silent and dark, as though it were waiting. Ben shook his head, sighing. I can't believe we're doing this. But maybe if we go back, we can end whatever this is. Mia looked uncertain, but her curiosity had returned. We'll just go in, see if we missed anything, and leave. No more exploring. If we see anything weird, we're out. With that, they walked up the path to the house, their footsteps loud on the overgrown gravel. The door creaked open as before, almost welcoming them back. They stepped inside, flashlights illuminating the dark, dusty interior. They headed straight to the room where they found the letter, but this time, something was different. The furniture, once dusty and untouched, looked as though it had been recently moved. Footprints disturbed the thick dust on the floor, leading toward the staircase. Someone's been here, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. They followed the footprints up the stairs, each step echoing through the silent house. When they reached the second floor, they saw it, the faint outline of the shadow they had glimpsed in the window. The figure was sitting in the chair, facing the window, as if it had never left. Mia took a shaky breath, forcing herself to speak. Who are you? The figure didn't respond, only lifted a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Then, with an eerie silence, it stood and turned toward them, revealing a face that seemed both familiar and strange, as though it were part of the house itself. It pointed to the envelope they disturbed, and a faint, raspy voice filled the room. *, you read what you were not meant to. The silence was mine, *. The words were barely more than a whisper, yet they filled the room with an oppressive weight. Chloe stepped back, her heart racing. We're sorry. We'll leave you alone. But the figure shook its head slowly, pointing at each of them in turn, a silent warning that echoed in the silence of the house. Mia, Ben, and Chloe felt a cold dread settle over them, a realization that they had disturbed something far older, something that demanded respect. Without another word, they turned and ran, their footsteps thundering down the stairs. They didn't stop until they were outside, gasping for breath, the cool night air filling their lungs. When they looked back, the shadowy figure stood in the window, watching them as it had before, its hand raised in a silent farewell. From that day on, they avoided Thornhill Road. The strange occurrences at home stopped, and life returned to normal, but each of them carried the memory of that figure, the quiet, eerie message lingering in their minds. They knew they'd leave the house alone, that they would never disturb the watcher again. And though they never returned, they felt the presence still, a quiet guardian in the house on Thornhill Road, waiting and watching over the silence. Part 3. Days had passed since Mia, Ben, and Chloe's second visit to the watcher's house, yet the memories still haunted them. The figure they'd seen, the whispered words about silence, and the way the shadow had pointed at each of them felt burned into their minds. Although the strange happenings around them had ceased, they couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with the watcher was far from over. It was on an otherwise uneventful Thursday afternoon when Ben, who had been the least inclined to talk about the experience, finally broke the silence. Do you guys feel like something's still waiting? He had gathered Mia and Chloe at their usual coffee spot, away from prying ears. Chloe shuddered. You're not the only one. I keep thinking I see shadows in my room, but every time I look, there's nothing there. It's like whatever we saw wants us to come back. Mia looked down, fidgeting with her coffee cup. Maybe we didn't understand something about that house. We read the letter, sure, but what if there's more? Something we missed? Ben shook his head. Are you suggesting we go back again? We barely made it out last time. That shadow, it didn't seem too happy with us. Chloe bit her lip, unsure. But we all feel it, don't we? It's like a pull. The house feels unfinished, like we left something behind. After a long silence, they all agreed. The house had stirred something within them, something they couldn't ignore. So, despite every rational part of them screaming to let it go, they made a plan to return once more, hoping to find some kind of closure. That night, they met at Thornhill Road under a crescent moon. The street was empty, its shadows stretching long and eerie as they made their way back to the looming structure of the Watcher's house. Its windows seemed darker than before, and the air felt colder, as though the house had been waiting just for them. As they pushed the front door open, the familiar creak filled the silence, echoing through the empty halls. The air inside was stale, carrying a damp, earthy smell, and every sound seemed louder, sharper. They turned on their flashlights and moved forward, retracing their steps to the room where they found the letter. The room looked just as it had before, with old, faded wallpaper and dust-coated furniture. But something felt different. This time, the air felt charged, thick with a presence they couldn't see but could feel watching them closely. "Let's just get this over with," Ben whispered, though his voice trembled. They split up, each scanning the room carefully, looking for anything they might have missed. Mia's flashlight beam landed on a corner of the room where a small, loose floorboard caught her attention. She knelt down, prying it up gently, and her hand brushed against something cold and metallic. She pulled it out to find an old key, tarnished and worn, with a strange engraving on the handle. "Look at this," she said, showing the key to the others. Ben raised an eyebrow. "Think it unlocks anything important? Maybe there's a hidden door or a box or something." Chloe took the key, examining it closely. "There's an inscription here. Looks like it says, 'Keeper.'" They exchanged uneasy glances, each realizing that the key likely had a purpose connected to the Watcher. Mia held her breath, glancing around. "I think maybe we're meant to find out where it goes." They moved cautiously through the house, the key clutched tightly in Chloe's hand as they inspected each room. Their flashlights swept over peeling wallpaper and dust-covered furniture, revealing nothing but shadows and silence. They were almost ready to give up when they reached the back of the house and noticed a small, locked door they hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind an old bookshelf. Chloe's heart pounded as she lifted the key, fitting it into the lock with a quiet click. She turned it, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ben shivered. "You know, we could just close this door and walk away." Mia forced a brave smile. "We've come this far. Besides, maybe this is what the Watcher wanted us to see all along." They made their way down the stairs, the air growing colder and damper with each step. Their flashlights illuminated the stone walls, revealing small, old-fashioned sconces along the stairway, the flames long extinguished but the candle stubs still there, as though someone had been using them not too long ago. The stairs ended in a small underground room, circular and lined with shelves filled with dusty books and strange trinkets, old clocks, glass vials, and handwritten notes scattered everywhere. In the center of the room was a large wooden chest, its surface engraved with symbols similar to those on the key. Mia approached the chest, hesitating for a moment before lifting the lid. Inside, wrapped in dark velvet, was an ornate mirror. The frame was twisted and intricate, resembling branches that curled around the glass, and as Mia angled her flashlight at it, they all felt a strange pull toward it. As they looked into the mirror, they saw themselves, but behind their reflections stood a shadowy figure, the same Watcher they had seen in the window. Its eyes were hollow, staring out from the reflection, as if it were caught between worlds. The figure lifted a hand, pressing it against the glass from the other side. Chloe backed away, her voice shaking. "We shouldn't have come back. It's still watching us, and now we're even closer." Mia reached out, almost entranced by the figure in the mirror, but Ben pulled her back. "Mia, no! We need to leave. Right now." They shut the chest quickly, their breaths coming in gasps as they backed toward the stairs. But as they turned to leave, they heard a faint whisper, a voice coming from the mirror, a soft, mournful plea. "Set me free." Mia froze, torn between the urge to help and the overwhelming fear that had seized her heart. She whispered back, her voice barely audible. "Ow!" The mirror's surface rippled, and the figure in the reflection pointed toward the open chest, gesturing at the books and papers scattered around them. Ben shook his head, grabbing Mia's arm. No. We're not doing this. Whatever it is, it's been here for a reason, and it doesn't need us to release it. But Mia felt a strange sympathy for the shadow. Maybe it just wants peace, Ben. Maybe it's been trapped here for years, waiting for someone to set it free. They each looked at the mirror one last time, the figure's sad, pleading gaze piercing through the glass, seeming to reach for their very souls. In a sudden moment of clarity, Mia knew that whatever this spirit was, it wasn't meant to linger here. She picked up one of the books, a small, leather-bound journal, and stuffed it into her bag. Fine, she said, her voice trembling. Let's go. But I'm keeping this, just in case. They hurried up the stairs, not daring to look back. The basement door slammed shut behind them as they reached the entryway, and without another word, they fled the house, not stopping until they were halfway down Thornhill Road, the house a dark silhouette behind them. This time, they vowed it was their final goodbye to the Watcher. But the feeling lingered, that strange, compelling sense that they hadn't left it behind entirely, that perhaps, even now, it was watching them from afar, waiting. Part 4. The days after their third visit to the Watcher's house were quiet, almost too quiet. Mia kept the small leather-bound journal hidden in her desk, but every now and then, she felt a strange pull to open it. The journal seemed to call to her, a silent reminder of the spirit in the mirror, still waiting to be set free. She couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher had followed them, lurking somewhere just out of sight. One night, unable to ignore the nagging curiosity, Mia opened the journal. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, detailing the story of a man named Edward Thornhill, who had lived in the house decades before. He'd been a quiet, reclusive man who spent most of his life alone, isolated from the rest of the town. According to his own words, he had been the keeper of secrets, responsible for guarding a powerful artifact, a mirror that acted as a portal to the spirit world. Mia read on, discovering that the mirror had been cursed. Edward had attempted to destroy it, but each time he tried, he found himself drawn back, unable to part with it. Eventually, he'd become trapped within its depths, a silent guardian bound to protect it for eternity. His last words in the journal were haunting, "I am here, bound to the silence. But one day, someone may set me free, Mia's hands shook as she closed the journal. She knew what she had to do. She texted Ben and Chloe, urging them to meet her at the house one last time. At first, they were hesitant, but the weight of the mystery pulled them back, each of them sensing that they couldn't leave Edward trapped forever. They met at the edge of Thornhill Road just after midnight. The house loomed ahead, darker than ever, as if it had been waiting patiently for their return. They walked up the path, flashlights in hand, their footsteps muffled in the still night air. Inside, the house felt different, more alive, as though the walls themselves were watching their every move. They made their way to the basement door, where the key still fit perfectly in the lock. As they descended, the cold air wrapped around them, the silence deepening with each step. When they reached the basement, they found the chest still open, the mirror resting inside. The glass was dull, its surface coated in a fine layer of dust, but as they approached, it began to shimmer, the reflection clearing to reveal Edward's ghostly figure, still watching them with sad, expectant eyes. Chloe took a step back, whispering, "Are we really doing this?" Mia nodded, her voice steady. I think this is what he wants. To be set free." She reached into her bag, pulling out the journal. As she opened it, she noticed a small passage she hadn't seen before, a ritual Edward had written out in case someone ever found him. It was simple: speak his name 3 times, followed by the words, "I release you." They gathered around the mirror, the air thick with anticipation. Mia held the journal tightly, looking into Edward's eyes. "Are you ready?" Edward nodded, his expression filled with relief and gratitude. Mia took a deep breath, and together, they began the ritual. "Edward Thornhill, I release you," Mia whispered, her voice barely a tremble. They repeated the words 3 times, each voice filling the room with a strange, powerful energy. With the final word, a blinding light filled the mirror, and Edward's face broke into a smile as his form dissolved, fading into the light. A rush of air filled the room, lifting the weight that had hung over them. The silence that had once felt oppressive was now warm, comforting, as if the house itself were finally at peace. They stood in silence, watching as the light faded and the mirror returned to normal, its surface reflecting only their own faces. Ben let out a breath, breaking the silence. I think it's over." Mia nodded, a feeling of relief washing over her. "We did it. He's free." They left the house quietly, each of them feeling lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. As they walked down Thornhill Road, the shadows seemed less menacing, the air filled with a strange calm. In the days that followed, they found themselves thinking less and less about the Watcher's house. The strange dreams and shadows disappeared, and their lives returned to normal. They would always remember Edward's story, but they no longer felt the eerie pull that had once haunted them. For the first time, they knew that the Watcher's house was finally at rest. Part 5. A few months passed, and life had finally returned to normal for Mia, Ben, and Chloe. Winter had come and gone, and with the warmth of spring, the memory of the Watcher's house had faded, leaving only faint recollections of their unsettling encounters. They would occasionally joke about it, though each of them knew they'd never forget the eerie nights spent in the house or the strange feeling of being watched. One Friday evening, while they were sitting around at a cafe, Mia's phone buzzed. She glanced down, expecting a message from a friend, but what she saw made her heart skip a beat. It was an unknown number, and the message was short, almost cryptic. "I am free, but not alone." Mia's face went pale as she showed the message to Ben and Chloe. Chloe frowned, reading it aloud. "Is this someone playing a prank? We never told anyone about Edward, right?" Ben shook his head, equally unsettled. "No one else knows, but what if there's more to this? What if the house wasn't just his prison?" They looked at each other, the familiar feeling of dread creeping over them. Mia tried to brush it off, convincing herself it was just a coincidence. But as the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there, waiting. Then one night, Mia woke to the sound of soft knocking. She lay still, listening, convinced it was a dream. But the knocking continued, faint and rhythmic, coming from her bedroom window. She sat up, her heart pounding as she peered through the darkness. Outside her window, in the faint glow of a street lamp, she saw a figure standing still, a shadow too familiar. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark, old-fashioned clothes, his face obscured by the night. Her blood ran cold as she realized that he was staring directly at her, his hand raised in a wave, just like the Watcher. Mia froze, too terrified to move, but as she blinked, the figure vanished, leaving her wondering if it had been a trick of the light. She told herself it had to be her mind playing tricks, a lingering memory of Edward. But deep down, she knew she'd seen something real. The next morning, Mia called Ben and Chloe, telling them what had happened. They listened in stunned silence, exchanging nervous glances. "We set him free, didn't we?" Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Edward's gone. But what if something else escaped with him?" Chloe's face turned pale. "You mean something we didn't know about?" They decided to return to the house once more, hoping to put the matter to rest. As they approached Thornhill Road, a strange calm had settled over the place, as if the house were watching them even now, waiting for their return. They entered through the familiar creaking door and found the place just as they'd left it, silent and empty. The basement door was open, the stairs descending into darkness. As they walked down, the air grew colder, and the memory of their last visit flooded back, bringing a renewed sense of unease. The chest was still there, the mirror lying within it, but the glass was cracked, splintered into a web of thin lines that distorted their reflections. Chloe stepped forward, examining the mirror. "This wasn't broken last time. Do you think someone's been here?" Mia shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever was holding Edward, maybe it held something else too, something that wasn't bound by his release." They decided to search the basement, looking for any other signs of activity. They found a set of faded, yellowed pages in a drawer, each filled with Edward's handwriting. The pages were notes, accounts of Edward's attempts to destroy the mirror, detailing what he discovered over his years in the house. In one passage, Mia found something that sent a chill down her spine. "Asterisk, I have freed myself, but another remains. A shadow, one that waits in the silence, beyond the glass. Should anyone release me, they must beware, for my freedom may also release what lies within. Asterisk. They looked at each other, horrified. Ben swallowed hard. So, we freed him, but we might have let out something else, something darker? Mia felt the weight of her decision that night, the ritual that had seemed so simple. I thought we were helping him, but I had no idea. Chloe glanced around the basement, her eyes wide with fear. If something else is out there, then it's free now, too. They left the house in silence, each of them haunted by the realization that Edward's story had only been part of the truth. Whatever they had set free that night in the basement was now out in the world, no longer confined to the house on Thornhill Road. Days passed, and though they tried to go about their lives, Mia, Ben, and Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Each of them reported seeing strange figures in the distance, shadows that lingered at the edges of their vision, vanishing whenever they looked directly at them. It was as if the watcher had left a part of himself behind, a silent reminder that their encounter with the house was far from over. One evening, Mia received another text message from the unknown number. Her heart raced as she opened it, dreading what she might find. The silence has ended. The message was brief, but the words held a chilling finality. She knew that whatever they had released from the Watcher's house was out there, somewhere, waiting, watching, its presence lingering in the shadows. And as she looked out her window, the faint outline of a figure standing under the street lamp below, she realized that the silence had only been the beginning. Part 6. In the days following the unsettling messages and sightings, Mia, Ben, and Chloe decided it was time to find a real end to their story with the Watcher's house. They knew they couldn't keep living in fear, feeling watched and haunted by the shadows. They had to return to Thornhill Road and confront whatever they had released, once and for all. They met on a clear, cold night, each bringing small items they hoped would protect them. A pendant Mia's grandmother had given her, a small, silver mirror Ben carried as a token of courage, and a handful of sage Chloe had brought just in case. None of them were sure these items would help, but they clung to the comfort of something tangible against the unknown. As they approached the house, the air felt calmer than it had on any previous visit, almost peaceful. It was as if the house knew this would be the final chapter of their story. They entered slowly, flashlights casting gentle beams over the dusty interior. The familiar eerie feeling was still present, but they felt a strange determination, a sense of control they hadn't felt before. I think it's waiting for us, Mia whispered, glancing at the staircase that led to the basement. Whatever we need to face is down there. They descended the stairs, and as they reached the basement, they saw it, the old chest, and within it, the cracked mirror. The glass was almost fogged over, but the shadowy figure they had seen before, the Watcher, or maybe something else, was faintly visible, looking out from within the web of cracks. Taking a deep breath, Mia stepped forward. Edward Thornhill, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. If you are still here, we want to help you. Tell us what you need to rest. The room grew colder, and a faint voice filled the air, almost like a whisper on the breeze. The silence, in the silence. Mia looked back at Ben and Chloe, feeling an inexplicable sense of confidence. She understood now. The silence wasn't only a state of being, it was a cage, a prison that had trapped Edward's spirit and any others bound by the curse of the mirror. By ending the silence, they could break the hold of the house itself, setting free anything else held within. They formed a circle around the mirror, each placing a hand on the cracked glass. Together, they began to speak, echoing the same words they had read in Edward's journal. We release you, Edward Thornhill. The silence has ended. With each repetition, the room seemed to come alive. The air crackled with energy, and a soft, warm light began to fill the mirror, brightening the shadows. The cracks in the glass faded, slowly smoothing until the mirror became clear and unmarred, and in that clarity, Edward's face appeared, his expression one of calm, quiet relief. For the first time, they saw him fully, as a man rather than a shadow. Thank you, he whispered, a faint smile gracing his face. I have watched over this place for so long, bound by silence. But now, I am free. The figure in the mirror faded, and the light around them softened, bathing the basement in a gentle, peaceful glow. They felt a warm breeze pass over them, as if Edward's spirit were finally leaving the house, no longer bound to the mirror or the shadows within it. As the light dimmed, Mia, Ben, and Chloe were left alone in the basement, surrounded by a comforting silence. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted, and the oppressive feeling that had once filled the house was gone. They felt only peace, as though the house had finally let go of the secrets it had been holding. They made their way back upstairs, each of them feeling a sense of closure. They walked through the house one last time, looking around at the rooms that had once filled them with such fear. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch them with kindness now. The air was no longer cold, and the eerie silence had been replaced with a gentle quietness, a peaceful stillness. Outside, the first light of dawn began to color the sky. They left the house, closing the door behind them with a finality that felt right, as if they were sealing a chapter that no longer needed to be revisited. As they walked back down Thornhill Road, a sense of relief washed over them. They had faced their fears, confronted the mystery that had haunted them, and, in doing so, had finally freed the spirit bound to the house. And they knew that, in some way, they had been changed by the experience, strengthened, bonded by what they had overcome together. In the following weeks, life returned to normal for the three friends. The strange sightings and eerie messages stopped, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. The house on Thornhill Road was finally just an old, empty structure, no longer filled with shadows or secrets. One day, as Mia, Ben, and Chloe sat together in their favorite cafe, Ben spoke up, a hint of a smile on his face. "You know, if anyone ever tells me they're going ghost hunting, I'm sending them in the opposite direction." They all laughed, a lightness filling the air. For the first time in a long time, they felt free from the weight of their past adventure, their shared laughter a testament to the peace they'd found. Mia nodded, smiling. "I think we've had our share of ghosts for a lifetime, but I wouldn't have wanted to face it with anyone else." Chloe raised her coffee mug. "To facing the unknown, and to making it out together." They clinked their mugs, a small but meaningful celebration of their victory over fear, mystery, and the dark shadows of the past. Each of them knew that the memory of the Watcher's house would stay with them, but it would be a story they could tell with pride, a reminder of their strength and their friendship. As they left the cafe, the three friends walked together in the warmth of the spring sun, feeling a lightness that only came with facing the darkness and emerging stronger. They knew that, wherever life took them next, they would carry with them the knowledge that they could face anything, as long as they stood together. And somewhere, deep in the silence of the Watcher's house, Edward Thornhill rested at last, finally free.